back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. We're hearing a lot about the economy in the news these days, so good thing we have an economist who joins us regularly to help us parse all of this stuff, particularly because the news media seems so bad at it. And especially we're hearing about what some people are calling, we're hearing about two things. Inflation, of course, we're hearing a lot about, and then about what some people are calling the great walkout. I mean, there's a wave of strikes, but there are also people just quitting lousy jobs. So here to help us make sense of all of that, or at least make progress towards making sense on all of that, is our good friend Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff is, of course, an economist and economic historian. He is professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He is also a visiting professor at the New School in New York, and he is the host of Economic Update on Free Speech TV Tuesday evenings. His latest book is The Sickness is the System, and he joins us once again. So, Richard Wolff, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thank you, RJ. I'm glad to be here.
We're always glad to have you. Let's start with this inflation. I'm seeing all sorts of panicky headlines right now. Headlines that are telling me and all of us news consumers that we're in deep trouble. We haven't seen these kinds of rises in inflation for 24 years or whatever. Can you help us understand what's really going on?
Let me try. And let me be honest with you by saying it is a sad exposure of the economic literacy, if I can say that, or lack of it, that there is so much confusion. And I don't fault the public. I fault the political leaders, the media writers, who are themselves so confused that when they write about it, it only makes everything worse. And that's a comment on our whole society that has to be spoken. And nothing illustrates it better than this discussion of inflation. In most cases, when I read it, it sounds like some mysterious, awful thing that has descended upon us, like a particularly bad storm that arose out of nowhere and now blankets us with snow or drought or rain. And we shake our fingers at the heavens, but we kind of all know, gee, it's horrible, it's terrible. And then we look around for somebody to blame, but we don't really know where to look. So we take whoever shows up first and try that person or that institution. And it's a mess since we all pick different ones. So let me try to go step by step, briefly, through the basic economics of inflation that nobody can dispute because it's simply a reality that we all kind of know is there. So first, let's begin. Who determines the prices of goods and services? Literally, who puts on the quart of milk or the pound of butter or the software program or whatever else we buy? Who stamps it with whatever the price is that we are expected to pay? And the answer is the employer class of the United States. That 1 or 2% of our people who are in a position to be the owner, the operator, on the board of directors or a leading executive, they're the ones who decide prices. Employees, the vast majority of us, we don't have anything to say other than either to pay what it costs or to do without. But we don't shape the prices. That's somebody else's privilege, somebody else's right. Number two, which is indisputable, what is it that leads employers to raise prices? The answer is, as every student in a business school has always been taught, the goal, the bottom line, the objective of a business executive, of an employer, is to improve the bottom line, to make more profits. Therefore, the first answer that ought to come into your mind when asking Gee, why are prices in general going up? And that's all the word inflation means. Prices in general going up. The answer is because employers see their profits improved by doing that. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't do it. This is not rocket science. I'm trying to be nice to the rocket scientists in your audience today. Okay. So then the question becomes, why would it enhance profits for corporations? They do the bulk of the business in our society to be jacking up their prices, which indeed they are. And the answer isn't very far to find. Many corporations are making two key observations. Number one, looking at their activities over the last 18 months, many corporations have not been as successful in making profits as they had hoped and expected to be. And the reason is no mystery. Over the last 2 years, we've had the combination of an economic crash and a public health catastrophe. We've had each of those alone. We've never had the two together at the same time. And so it has hurt a lot of businesses' bottom lines. And they want to make up for what they lost over the last 2 years. And raising prices is a way to do that. Number two, many corporations notice that the government, trying to cope with the catastrophes of the last 20 years, the crash in 2000, the worst crash in 2008, and the worst of all three of them, the one we're still in, many companies are seeing that the government is pumping vast amounts of new money into our economy, which is true, that's happening. So they're saying to themselves, gee, all of this new money is sloshing around the American economy. Maybe I can pull some my way by raising the prices of what I charge for, because there's the money out there that should allow people to pay for it. Bit of a risk, I might be wrong, but it looks like the right moment. And put that together with wanting to make up for what was lost over the last 18, 24 months, you have a very powerful reason for corporations to be doing what we know they're doing, which is raising their price. Last point on this. Corporations know that for the rest of us, this is bad news. We now have to pay more for what we used to have to pay less for. That's not good. To give you an example, the inflation is now running at between 6 and 6.5% per year. Average increase in wages in this country is nowhere near that, which means that even if you are among the workers who's getting a wage increase, they're averaging around 5%, 4.5% to 5%. You're still falling behind because even with an extra 4 or 5%, you can't afford what has gone up by 6%. I mean, that's simple arithmetic. So for the vast mass of the people, this is not good news at all. And so the employers have to be careful. They can't admit to all of us that what they're doing is raising prices to make more profits, which is the truth. They have to come up with something else because they don't want consumers to get angry at them for doing what they are doing. So it's important to muddy the water, to come up with, gee, maybe it's the Chinese. We blame them for everything else. Maybe it's the immigrants from Latin America. Sound far-fetched? I've heard it. So you can go on or blame Mr. Biden if you're a Republican, or blame Mr. Trump if you're a Democrat. There's lots of candidates to be scapegoated here because you don't want the honest truth to be the center of the conversation, which is we have a profit system that tells every business owner, jack up the price of what you sell whenever you think you could get away with it. And therefore, we're living with the results of that situation, coming together of enough conditions so that the businesses are doing what we're watching them do, and there's no mystery to it.
Well, a couple thoughts, Richard Wolff. Number one, the media in this country, the press in this country, speaks about it in almost as obscure and mystical a way as the economics profession itself does, it seems to me. And that we're treated to these proclamations that inflation is this. Now, I may be oversimplifying, and I urge you to tell me if I am. But it seems to me if prices go up let's say 6.5% annualized, okay, let's make up is roughly that. So if inflation is 6.5%, well, inflation is what it costs to buy stuff. So buying stuff is, well, it's the workers' wages to make the stuff or deliver the stuff or service the stuff, but they're not going up 6.5%. So that doesn't explain nearly all of it. Then there's the raw material to make the stuff. If that's not going up more than 6.5% because workers' wages aren't going up that much, then that doesn't explain it either. Then there's the piece that never gets discussed in the media, which is a piece you just mentioned. Well, how much are they taking as a cut of that 6.5%? That doesn't come up at all. So it seems to me that on the simplest level, there are three numbers we should be thinking about, or three, right? I mean, it's like what people are being paid, what stuff costs, raw stuff, and then what they're charging us. It seems to me those are the three numbers. And if it's all MBS in Saudi Arabia and it's all gasoline, then okay, then we know who the bad guy is, but it's not. If it's all, the Bolivians had the audacity to elect a government that won't play ball enough with us, and so lithium's gone up, whatever it is, but it doesn't get presented that way, does it? It gets presented as this material. Well, Joe Biden didn't, it doesn't, we don't even know how much of that 6.5% is increased. I never see in the paper, well, inflation's gone up 6.5%, and of that, 1.2% is profit taking. I don't even ever see that number.
No, that's the point. You are not supposed to think about that. You're not supposed to worry about that. You're not supposed to give any ammunition to the people who say, like me, that a good part of this increase in prices is designed for and leading to a boost in profits. That just like working people want to make up for their losses over the last two years, and by the way, that's part of the struggle we're seeing in the Great Resignation, in the wave of strikes and so on. The businesses want to do it, but the difference is that businesses have an easy way to do it, to jack up the price. Here's another aspect of this that makes me upset as an economist. The Republicans and the conservatives and the libertarians like to blame the government pretty much for everything. So here's another one. We have an inflation, you see, because the government is increasing the money supply, which it shouldn't do. Well, this leaves the realm of bad economics and enters the more populated realm called stupidity. The government has been increasing the money supply in this country in record-breaking amounts for 20 years, during which we had no inflation. Therefore, the notion that one leads to the other would, in any person honest enough to look at the numbers, never even come up, let alone be pushed. But there's an economics of it all that should be clear to everybody. When the government increases the money supply, there's more money in the economy. That's true. But the question is, what do the corporations that set prices do when there's a lot more money sloshing around? They have a choice. They could appeal to that extra money because they want to get their hands on it by ordering more goods to be produced and sold. That's how you soak up the more money. And that's what the government wants, because if you sell more goods, you have to produce them, and that'll give people jobs. But of course, corporations, being free enterprises, are free not to sell more goods, but to try to soak up the extra money by jacking up the prices, which, hello, that's what they're doing. But you can't blame the government's increase in money for something that doesn't happen when the government increases money. It only happens when corporations choose to raise the price, which no one forces them to do. And as to the fact that, workers' wages go up, whenever you see an inflation, you see the wages go up, after the inflation. It's workers trying to catch up. It is not the other way around. And ditto, to explain it by saying the inputs they buy go up, well, that's circular reasoning, because the reason the inputs are going up is because their inputs are going up and our outputs are their inputs. Therefore, this is a game in which the corporations are all raising prices and then blaming each other for it. Anything to avoid the profit motive, which we're taught about in school, but which is strangely missing when we analyze as urgent an economic problem as inflation.
So I want to go back, Richard Wolff, to the beginning of what you just said, because you hear this from time to time. The government has increased the money supply. Every time I've heard that, I have not had an increased money supply personally. I've never gotten an envelope from the Federal Reserve or anyone else in government with a bunch of 20s and $100 bills in it saying, here's your share of the increased money supply. It has not happened to me in my many years of living. So it seems to me, now, again, you're the economist, but it seems to me, especially this last time around as the pandemic hit, they not only increased the money supply, but they didn't even bother funneling it all through banks. They actually opened money funnels to publicly traded corporations themselves, didn't they? Yeah. And so we basically, have this mental image of corporations as well as banks now, big corporations especially, inflated like, when you make balloon animals out of, just these big inflated, stretched, thin things, flush with money, and they're saying, inflation, we got to jack up your rates. And oh, by the way, stock dividends are, we got to pay a bunch of stock dividends. Even if those companies like Boeing, for example, grotesquely mismanaged and murdered people, they still get inflated like a balloon animal, and they still get to pay dividends. And am I on the right track here?
Absolutely. And it's important, very important what you say. Because, of course, there are N, where N is a large number. There are N ways to increase the money supply. I'm going to give you two. One is to lend a lot more money to banks, which is what the Federal Reserve does. Here's an alternative. Print the money, put it in an airplane, and announce you're flying over Philadelphia next week, and you're going to drop $10 billion in $50 bills. So you're urging people to get outside with a basket and catch as many of those bills floating down as possible. And then Tuesday you'll be in Denver, and Thursday you'll be in Dallas, and so forth and so on. Would that increase the money supply? Yes. Would that money then go and build up everything in the economy? Sure, because all those people collecting the money as it flows down from the helicopter or the airplane will take that money and go to the local store. And there they will buy things that will lead the storekeeper to replenish the shelves in the store. And that will make jobs happen. You know what that's called? Trickle up economics, because you're giving the new money to the folks who need it most, and then it trickles up into the coffers of the corporations who produce what those people who've collected the money paid for. That's the alternative to trickle down. When you give the money to the richest amongst us, those who arguably need it least, and then wait for it to trickle down, which sometimes happens and often doesn't. But we know it'll trickle up because the mass of people have no savings, need to spend that money tomorrow for the things that they are behind on already. So we know it'll trickle up. And yet, who's the advocate for trickle up economics? Almost nobody. The labor movement, what's left of it, a few social movements that are radical or progressive. But the establishment and the media act as though that's not an option. But of course it is. And because that option wasn't chosen, you, poor Richard RJ, never experienced the Federal Reserve sticking some money in your wallet as none of us have, because we live in a society where those at the top organize the policy to have that remarkable quality that it lines their pockets first and foremost.
And now we have, and operators are standing by for my Federal Reserve money. They're waiting, but okay. But now we have another phenomenon because we are presumably coming to the end of this protracted process of debating in Washington what I would argue is a very modest proposal, extremely modest proposal, given the gravity of the challenges we face, called Build Back Better, and which began as Bernie Sanders saying he wanted 6 trillion for it, and Joe Biden saying he wanted 3.5 trillion. Now they're at my bet all along was 1.6 to 1.9 trillion. And a lot of that would be fast plays, moving things around, pretending you're spending money. But anyway, so we're coming to the end of this process. And because it's been so protracted, now people are saying, well, inflation and government deficits, and we can't spend all this money. I did a graphic showing what Biden proposes to spend on the environmental crisis versus the military, which was ludicrous, 20 times as much for military. And so we're getting everybody saying, well, gosh, now the inflation we're seeing makes it even less possible for us to give people paid family leave like every other developed country in the world has, or, you name it. And for healthcare, forget it. Medical care when people need it, no chance. Because, inflation and deficits. And how should we be looking at that?
Well, I think you answer your own question. You should be looking at it for the hypocrisy of it all, for the absurdity, but mostly because, and I say this with genuine sadness, this is a society that is determined to deny the crisis within which it functions. And my wife's a psychotherapist. I learned from her the power of the human mind when confronted with painful, difficult situations to magically get around them, at least for a while. Denial.
My mother? I think, that's a perfect description of my mother, but please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. And she explained it to me, and I just transpose it into the realm of economics. Let me say it again. We have had public health disasters in the past, not many, but doozies. For example, 100 years ago, the Spanish flu. And we have had economic crashes of our capitalist system in the 1930s and so forth. We've never had these two things happen at the same time. Never. We are now living through that. And the constant explanation that either this crisis isn't there or we're recovering magically from it is childish denial. This is not the case. Over half of the American labor force was unemployed for some period of time. Over half of them over the last 18 months were unemployed, some for a few weeks, some for months. But this is a trauma. We just were told yesterday, or at least I learned it yesterday, that we have another record. 100,000 people died of overdose of drugs this last year. We've never crossed the 100,000 mark. I mean, these are staggering failures. We're 4.5% of the world's people, and we have suffered something like 16% of the world's deaths from COVID. That's called a failure. The war in Afghanistan, that was a failure. The war in Iraq, we've been defeated. I mean, I could go on, but you're looking at a network of problems that require a massive solution program. And what we get are peanuts from Mr. Biden and Republicans who want to cut the peanuts into small pieces because, we can't afford a whole peanut right now. Well, when could we? When have we ever had a problem of this? They all want nothing to change. That's what Republicans want, and that's what a large number of Democrats are perfectly comfortable with, progressives excluded. And that's a recipe That's what makes me sad. That's a recipe for the problems getting worse. Trump did nothing to change that, and the problems got worse. That helped Mr. Biden get elected, but he hasn't learned the message, so it continues to get worse. The workers at the John Deere Corporation voted to accept, after rejecting, I believe, the contract 2 or 3 times before, they won a lot. I don't want to take anything away from them. The first offer was 5% per year. They're getting 10, not a minor matter. They're getting an $8,500 signing bonus on top of that. They're not paying an extra nickel for their medical health insurance and so on. They won a lot, but it's a 6-year contract with a total cap of 20%. Well, if the inflation over the next 6 years stays at the current 6%, then that will mean prices are then 36% higher than they are now, not even compounding as I should. And that's a lot more than 20%. They will be 15% lower standard of living. I mean, that's the reality. And when the Federal Reserve says, oh, don't worry, the inflation is temporary, I take a deep breath. The Federal Reserve, in addition to mastering our money, is now clairvoyant about the future, which is a stunning thing for them to attempt, since they have been wrong most of the time in the past when they predicted the future. Nobody in their right mind should take this seriously. So for me as an economist, looking at the cacophony of noise here, this is a society that is desperate and trying to fake its way through a very real crisis.
And, it's interesting. Desperation was one of the words that was in my head as you were talking, Richard Wolff, because we have now, some people were calling it Striketober, a wave of strikes in October. My friend Mike Elk, who was on last week, was a great labor reporter, as the Payday Report. He says it's a misnomer because there's been a wave of strikes basically since the pandemic began, and certainly accelerating in the last 10, 12 months. So, and then we're seeing, besides the active labor actions, well, first of all, fascinating thing about Elk, he started tracking any labor action of 100 people or more, whereas the government, as my understanding, only tracks labor actions of 1,000 people or more. So why does it take my friend to do what we should be tracking anyway, number one? And number two, why does it take him starting a website? Now the Washington Post is drawing on his data, which is great for him and his visibility. Why doesn't the Washington, we fired, the mainstream newspapers fired all their labor reporters, and the economic section of the newspapers are called the business section, right? They're not called the labor section. So excuse that mild digression and rant, but the business section, right? I mean, that to me says it all. But we now have, in addition to the strike actions, what some people are calling the Great Resignation. And Troy, get ready because you're going to have to bleep this. But I think, it should not be astonishing to anybody that given the slightest alternative, workers will say, I don't want to work at your shitty job anymore. I mean, that should not startle anybody. And yet our business, quote unquote, media seems to be astonished by the fact that people, however meager the alternative, are so abused and underpaid in the workplace that sometimes they just, forget it. I'm going to opt out of this for a while, or try to find a job that's a little bit less immiserating. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the quote so-called Great Resignation, as well as the wave of strikes we've been seeing.
Well, very quickly. I think the strikes and the quitting are, for me, unmistakable signs of a system in very deep trouble. You take people out of the rut they have allowed themselves to get into, and the pandemic took us out of our workplace ruts. And when you come back, you see it, not with the dull eyes of everyday repetition, but having had a few months where you were at home, taking care of your kids or your home. And now you see the job for what it is, and your word was perfectly appropriate here, and you can't believe you did this. You can't believe you tolerated this long. You see it afresh, and seeing it afresh, millions and millions of our fellow citizens are saying, as the old song went, take this job and shove it, because they're not going to tolerate it. And then I have a friend, Professor Tom Lambert, who teaches in the business school and the University of Louisville in Kentucky. And he has taught me recently that there's a whole body of research that he himself has contributed to that shows that we have a bloated supervisory strata in our system. Other countries with capitalist economies like ours do not hire, do not need, and do not want these vast levels of supervising. And too many supervisors with too little to do get on the nerves of the people they supervise. And I think an awful lot of people, and Tom Lambert's right, an awful lot of people were free of that absurd over supervision for a few weeks or months. And when they went back, they were in no mood to subordinate themselves to it again. And they walked away from crappy management supervisors who are a dead weight and a financial loss in this society, and are contributing to the very difficulties of capitalism, which lead us to do everything other than ask the question, what are we doing with this excess army of supervisors?
Well, I think that's a great summary, and maybe we'll be able to talk about it more at some point. And I still think the movie Office Space, which you've probably seen, is the person who made that is the Eisenstein for our time. I consider that a very left-wing film. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. So as always, Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much for your insights. And as always, thank you for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Richard. I look forward to our next continuation.
As do I. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.